All right, let's go ahead. All right, guys. Well, welcome back, everyone. We are going to go ahead and launch into our panel discussion for today. I hope everyone had a chance to see David Hughes' presentation just a moment ago. So continuing on with some of that subject matter, we thought it would be interesting to have a panel discussion that talked about revenue recovery through data intelligence. So again, keeping with some of these themes that we've already talked about, technology implementation, different areas in which that affects utility operations, and then how that affects the finance side of utility. So those are some points that we want to get into. Once again, if anybody has any questions for these panelists, I suggest I encourage you to submit them throughout. I'll be monitoring the questions that we get in, and I will try to throw as many as I can at our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody. Keisha, I see that you are on with us now. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we've got you loud and clear. Okay, so everyone, we have Keisha Thorpe, Assistant General Manager of Operations with the Clayton County Water Authority. We have Russ Titus, Senior Operations Superintendent with New Jersey American Water. Kenji Takeuchi, Senior Vice President of Technology Solutions with Mueller Water Products. And again, joining us, we have David Hughes, Independent Water Innovation Specialist. So, gentlemen, Keisha, thanks for being with us today. Glad to have you, Keisha. I'm gonna go to each of you to give just a brief background on your experience in the industry and a little bit about your current role. Keisha, I'll start with you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrew. Well, like Andrew said, my name is Keisha Elizabeth Thorpe, and I serve as the Assistant General Manager of Operations for Clayton County Water Authority, where I am responsible for water production, wastewater treatment, distribution and conveyance, and stormwater services. I have been in this position for over a little over a year and a half now. So just a little bit about Clayton County. We are located just minutes south of downtown Atlanta. So if you've ever visited Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, you have visited Clayton County. We serve about 83,000 customers, and we provide water, wastewater, and stormwater services. And I guess as it pertains to our discussion today, revenue recovery through data intelligence, the authority has focused on reducing our non-revenue water losses by implementing a water loss program that addresses both real and apparent losses to, in a way, drive efficiency, conservation, and cost savings. So thank you for having me today. Glad to be a part of the panel and looking forward to this discussion.
All right, Russ.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and hello from the beautiful state of New Jersey. My name is Russell Titus, and I'm currently employed with New Jersey American Water, and have been with American Water now for just under 24 years, and have had a variety of roles. Currently, actually, my title just changed 2 weeks ago. So I am now a senior project manager with our project delivery group in engineering. Previously spent quite a bit of time in the operations group, but focusing on project delivery in areas related to revenue recovery through water loss management activities. So a little bit about the company I work for. New Jersey American Water is an investor-owned private utility. We serve 2.5 billion people in the state of New Jersey with approximately 670,000 connections, over 9,000 miles of pipe. So it's a pretty large system, pretty complicated, and constantly using different innovative techniques to try to find out where the water goes, make sure it gets to the customer, and try to be as efficient as possible. And that's my role currently in the company, is with delivering our water to our customers efficiently and utilizing any innovative technologies to make sure that we spend our capital monies wisely. So glad to be here today.
All right, Kenji.
Hi, thanks. My name is Kenji Takeuchi. I'm with Mueller Water Products. I'm the Senior Vice President of our Technology Solutions. I've really only been here a little shy of a year now. What I'm really excited about and challenged to do is leading our technology groups, which includes our IT and engineering as well as our technology business segments. But really, it's about accelerating our digitalization and taking advantage of our sensor and data and software to drive differentiation with these technologies into our all of our Mueller products. So I'm very excited about this conversation today.
All right, and Dave, you want to give a brief introduction again?
Yeah, you already gave a very nice introduction, Andrew. What I'd just like to talk about is I'm also fascinated with innovation and how well it can work for utilities. And I guess for this particular conference, really interested in exploring and talking about making the business case for some of these things that really have been seldom tried or have just such a narrow experience that makes a lot of utilities a little nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, with that, let's kind of get right into it. I mean, like I mentioned before, a lot of our attendees and our audience for this conference historically, are very much focused in the financing side of the utility. We have finance managers, CFOs, people in those types of roles that attend this event. And so this is a slightly different topic area. We're talking a little bit more about the operation side of things, I think, with regards to new technologies. So we're going to try and highlight some synergies between these two areas. So with that, my first question for each of you is really, when we look at technology advancement, I mean, from my perspective, it's a major theme in the industry for the last 10 years. Maybe you think it's been longer. I know technology is always advancing, but you go to the annual AWWA show and you walk around and there's all kinds of buzzwords like smart water and nowadays we hear things like digital twin, AI, machine learning. It's very much geared towards technology advancement. And I'm wondering if there's one single advancement or piece of technology that's had a large impact on water distribution efficiency and then cost savings. What would it be in your opinion? And Keisha, I'll go to you first with this one.
Okay, thank you. Well, there has been a tremendous amount of technology development in this area, but I guess I have to speak to what I know. And so I'm going to speak to, I think, advancements made in the areas of reducing non-revenue water, both on the apparent and the real loss side. I think those areas of technology have made a tremendous impact on water distribution efficiency and cost savings. And the reason why I say that is, when you have a major main break, the response is immediate. You go out there and you address it. However, for continuous leaks that are undetectable, those become extremely costly. Just in the pumping expenses, the undermining of the pipe, the repair of the pipe, what those leaks do to our actual distribution system. So, with applying technology to those real losses and then beginning to apply technology to apparent losses to address meter inaccuracies, that too can result in cost savings for utilities and address that potential loss of revenue there for having meter inaccuracies. So again, using any type of data analytics to address meter inaccuracies and our real losses, I think are tremendous advancements towards distribution efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. All really great points. Russ, what are your thoughts on this one? One, if you could kind of point to one single advancement or technology, what kind of stands out to you?
Well, I'm going to give a little bit of a preface first before I actually answer the question. And the plug is here for the standardized water audit. When we take a look at investment opportunities and reducing non-revenue water, you need to get your ducks in a row first. And right now, the AWWA water loss audit is available for free. And that's a great starting point for anybody that's looking to do any type of reduction in water losses. And if you want to invest capital, where and how to invest it. So that would be the preface to all this, is that, you know, you have a robust system in place for doing water audits, either internally or through an external consultant, and trying to validate that data. That would be the first thing. And that really helps out with your apparent losses, figuring out exactly how you're doing with your meter changes. You know, does everybody have the right size meters? Are you testing your system delivery meters as frequently as possible? So once you have all that in place, then you go to the solutions, because you know where the problems are. And on the real loss side, we at American Water have utilized a number of different opportunities. The current one that I'm currently engaged in is using permanent acoustic monitoring. That may not be the answer for every utility. It is utility and system specific. Even within the state that I oversee, it's not the answer for everybody, but it is definitely the answer for some of the systems. So I would say that the advent of continuous acoustic monitoring with correlation, so now we're able to not only know where those non-surfacing leaks are, but we can schedule them, and we can get all of our road opening permits in order, schedule the crews, even put the correct repair equipment on the trucks before they roll. And it's great for the customers, because they will come out and will say, there's not a problem here. What are you doing here? And there's a leak in the street here. We're going to take care of it before, you know, we have to close down your street. So from a customer perspective, it's a very positive response that we get.
Absolutely. Yeah, Kenji, obviously, you know, with a big manufacturer, you know, in the industry like Mueller, what do you guys kind of see as some of the important advancements? Obviously, you guys have been a part of them, but you know, if you could kind of look at one area, what do you see as a standout?
Yeah, it's a interesting question about if there's any single technology that kind of accelerated or made all this happen. I think it's really not a single technology, in as much as it's really like two lines converging that's making decisions happen in a digital water decision and implementation, is like the need for the solutions, the need and the pain of aging infrastructures, and identifying leaks and the budget constraints that those cause, or the loss in revenue that causes. And the population migration coming in and really stressing our current water networks. And so that need is increasing, while the risk and the efficiencies the risks of the technologies are decreasing, meaning that the other way, I think technology is advancing. Like, you know, the Internet of Things is kind of a category of technologies where sensors and cloud computing and connectivity are providing really reliable, and it's becoming more credible as a solution. And so when we see this intersection happening of the need and the technology, I think that's why we're seeing, and we're going to see this adoption into how can we extend the life of our pipes and capital assets, how can we monitor for leaks and minimize leaks, and attack that to minimize our revenue loss. Things like that. So I think it's an interesting time where the technology and the need have intersected, and we'll see the acceleration.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. Dave, what do you think about this? You know, is it one single piece of technology, or is it kind of a couple things happening at once, like you mentioned? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I want to sort of supplement what Kenji did, but come at it from a different place. I would say data integration and analytics is really what's making things work. The ability to take data from different sources and somehow, some way being able to put them into some kind of a device that analyzes it and presents that to the end user. So suddenly having pressure information and flow information when combined gives you a much better picture. Or in the water plant where, you know, getting the what's the water, what's the turbidity of the water, what's the dosage, being able to have systems that can actually function, I think is the most startling advance that I have seen. And the analytics, to be honest, the machine learning, for example, on Mainbreak is just stunning to me. We've been struggling for years to try to figure out which mains are going to break next year, and to suddenly have something close to that ability is just very enlightening and very helpful for that non-revenue issue that we've all been discussing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you guys all mentioned, you know, a few things there. You know, so I'm thinking, you know, why don't we take this a step further and focus on the cost-saving aspects of it? You know, if all of this tech adoption, you know, whether we're talking something in metering or geared specifically towards water loss. I mean, you know, Russ mentioned, you know, we look at two parts of that: the real and the apparent loss. So no matter what we're talking about, you know, a lot of these technologies, you know, they're aimed at increasing efficiency. But talk about the cost-saving aspects. How do these technologies really impact a utility's financial health? I mean, they are an investment, first of all. But let's get into a little bit of the back-end cost savings. Keisha, from your perspective, I mean, is that a big driver for the adoption of these technologies?
Yes, I think so. Definitely coming from an operations standpoint, you know, I look at that first, but of course, from a financial standpoint, I think it's extremely important. And by us, you know, adopting a non-revenue water, you know, reduction measure, I think it has had a positive impact because we are specifically in our particular program in addressing apparent losses, we are specifically targeting our large meter accounts. We're looking at meter under registrations in water meter read areas. And by implementing this program, it has allowed us to strategically target those meters and test and repair, and to be able to get accurate reads on those. You know, prior to, we know we're losing money on our largest customers. So I definitely think it has a positive impact on the utility's financial health. But even with that, I think there's some more added benefit to that of just being a good steward of our water resources, being responsible with our customers, ensuring that they are receiving accurate bills and that they trust us, you know, as a utility to deliver a quality service to them. So the benefits have not only been financial, but also have been beneficial, I think, to our customers.
Sure. And Russ, what are your thoughts on that? Like I said, kind of the back end savings, and you know, is that the primary driver for the adoption, or how do you guys kind of approach implementing new technologies?
Yeah, there are actually three drivers that we look at. Definitely the economic one is the most important, or the first to look at, because if you cannot I should, you know, preface it by saying, you know, we are a private company, and in being so, we have to be responsible to our shareholders. And so the economics of any investment are paramount, but also there are two other things, and I'm glad Keisha mentioned it, because when you take a look at environmental sustainability, there's an aspect to that you have to consider into this. And there are a number of projects that we are currently engaged in that financially will not pay back typically what we're looking for, but it's the socially and environmentally responsible things to do. And a lot of that goes back to our investor relations team and our ESG statement, where we're trying to bring together, our governance, our sustainability, and our environmental policies so that our investors can look at it and know that, yes, financial return is important, but so is keeping the company sustainable from an environmental standpoint and keeping the customers happy, letting them know that we don't take anything for granted. So those three things would be very, very important. When it comes to the actual investments itself, we do build rate cases, business cases, and David mentioned that a little bit earlier. If something really doesn't pan out, or if you don't have one of those three drivers in place, we have a vetting process that everything has to be presented to first a state committee and then a national committee. And the regulators that regulate our utility will give the final say. And they ask the questions, whether that was a good investment or not. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our stakeholders and our customers to make sure we deliver on projects that make economic sense.
Sure, and Kenji, from your perspective, how when Mueller is looking at new products or research and development, what are some of the things that you guys look at that you kind of gear your technologies towards? Is it efficiency, cost savings, all of the above? What are some of the drivers that you look at?
At Mueller, we definitely look at all of those, but the spirit of the question of financial savings, I think that's kind of an easy, good use case to think about. Like the technology that Russ was talking about earlier, being able to find leaks and monitor the progression of those leaks before it becomes like a giant burst and incredible loss of water and revenue and wasted energy and treatment costs and chemicals. Being able to watch that progression through technologies and being able to address it quickly and efficiently. When you address it earlier versus later, you save multiples of your cost in repairing something early than after already a surfaced problem. And so that money savings then obviously can get translated into better spent on capital expenses or reducing your operational expenses. So it directly affects the bottom line of the financial situation of people. And of course, like also what we're talking about with using artificial intelligence, we can have like a virtual assessment of our pipe conditions, and we can proactively look at those pipes that we think will have the highest consequences of their failures, creating the most revenue loss, and then attack those first. So those are the kind of the fun things that you can do with technology to drive cost savings.
Sure, and David, what are some of your thoughts on this as all of these technologies, at the end of the day, the impact on the financial health of the utility? Do you see that increasing and that the technologies are properly geared towards that end goal?
Yeah, I think they are, but everybody's done a really good job covering the subject. I wanted to put a little emphasis on piloting. There's a real opportunity to work with vendors to develop and progress. And the example Russ had of the leak monitoring involved Mueller, and it also involved our research group in advance of that to work really side by side with the vendor to be very honest with them and say, well, it would be good if this technology did this or did that. And I'm always looking for the company that asks you what you want instead of telling you that they've got the best thing ever and we can give it to you. So you also have to be smart about looking for the right vendors, the vendors who are willing to invest time with you so that you have some potential to really make whatever that technology innovation is something that will work not only for your utility, but probably for all the other utilities.
That's a great point. I'd be curious to hear Keisha and Russ's, thoughts more on that in terms of, how they work together with some of these vendors to implement some of these technologies for specific projects to solve specific challenges. But that does lead kind of nicely into my next question. I wanted to start talking about some projects here. Keisha, you did talk a little bit about, your work. I think you're more towards the apparent loss side of things. Can you give us a little bit of insight into Clayton County's work and how some of the work that you've done really illustrates, these kind of points on capturing lost revenue and increasing efficiency in that way?
Right, exactly. So I've been talking about our non-revenue water loss program through apparent losses, and I guess let me tell you how we started out. Before we did this implementation, we only focused on the top 600 major users within our distribution system for yearly inspection and testing. Now we have over 2,500 large meter accounts. So you can see there's innately some issues with this particular approach. So, one of them is that it only focused on a limited amount of meters, which resulted in, usually not testing and really pinpointing the meters that actually had issues and the meters that we were actually losing revenue on. We only had about a 6% accuracy rate. So there was no structured meter replacement program in place. And we know that we were losing money, on these large meters. So now that we have a structured approach to addressing these large meters, it has helped us to identify and really quantify the amount of potential revenue lost on meters if we had not addressed them or actually went out and tested and repaired and did what we needed to do to the meter. So when we look at the work that we've done, we've identified over $1 million in annual lost revenue due to meter inaccuracies over a projected 5-year term. And so that projected to we were losing about $67 per large meter, on a yearly basis. So we've been able to see that, by proactively addressing these meters that, that is, actually being able to hopefully, we would not lose that revenue. But also I wanted to point out, Russ talked a little bit about the AWWA water loss audit, where here in the state of Georgia, there's a Water Stewardship Act. And so, by us implementing this program, it helped us also to comply with that act. And, that act, calls for us to complete an annual water loss audit. And it calls for us to set, measurable goals and to try to get a valid or a good data validity score. And so what we have seen, through the implementation of this particular program, is that our apparent losses have decreased, and it has helped our data validity score to increase. And so now we are becoming more compliant, with that Water Stewardship Act. It's an annual report that we have to submit, to the state. So for us, this program had, major benefits, compliancy or regulatory, stewardship, delivering good customer service, and, hopefully being able to realize some lost revenue. So it has been extremely beneficial for us to do that.
Yeah, that's some really great insight. And Russ, maybe you could talk about some of that on your end. I know, as we've mentioned a couple times, you talked about the continuous leak monitoring. Maybe give us a little bit more background on how you guys started that and some of the results you've had to date in terms of the recapturing the lost revenue or cost savings.
Sure, be glad to share some very poignant stories, and these are real life situations. These are not fictitious sidebars. So when you live it, you learn. Starting back in 2015, and this is after conducting water audits for a minimum of 5 years, I was able to identify certain systems where different solutions could be implemented. And the one that dealt with acoustic leak monitoring is a system where we had already looked at the apparent losses using our geographic information systems to try to identify if there were any customers that were not being billed properly. We did a huge data mining effort to make sure everybody was in the right rate class and make sure they were in the correct water system, because we have a lot of adjoining water systems. Sometimes people think of American Water as just one big water system, and when in actuality it's made up of literally hundreds of smaller systems. Some of them are side by side, and some of them are standalone. But the one system that immediately jumped out was in northern New Jersey, where the infrastructure consisted of a lot of very linear assets that were between 70 and 100 years old. And the first thing we did was take a look at the condition of those pipes. And we realized that we had to accelerate our replacement and rehabilitation efforts in that system. However, that costs a lot of money. You're talking upwards of $1 million per mile. So we decided that we were going to try to keep the water in the pipe while we were doing the rehabilitation and replacement. And I promise I won't use a percentage number again for my talk for the rest of the afternoon, because percentages are going away in the new water audit software that's being released at the end of this year, because they could be very misleading, not only to the system operators, but also to the regulators. But here's a case where we had one system of 85,000 connections, and our water losses were approaching 30%. The variable production costs were very high because we were purchasing about 40% of our water there from another purveyor. So our variable production costs were between $1,500 and $1,800 per million gallons. So there was a huge financial incentive there to see what we could do. And over the past 5 years, we've been able to drop our losses in that system with one of these permanent acoustic monitoring solutions in terms of percentage from 28 down to just over 17%. And in terms of other performance indices, if you take a look at your real losses per service connection per PSI, we went from 1.82 down to just under 1. So when you look at all the different performance indicators or indices for non-revenue water across the board, we saw a huge improvement. Let me talk in terms of dollars, because I know that I'm sure there are people that are joining us that say, show me the money. And, I don't blame them at all. So in this case, and these are published studies that I'm sharing with you, so there's nothing that I cannot share. Just last year alone, we saw a variable production cost savings in this one district of $2.8 million. And the system delivery was reduced by over 1.7 billion gallons through the efforts of this program that we instituted there with the permanent acoustic monitoring.
Yeah, that's obviously very impressive, and like you mentioned, it's always so interesting to hear about how high water loss rates can get in certain areas. So it really just highlights how big of a challenge this is and how important it is to address it from a financial standpoint. So keeping with maybe mentioning some real life project examples, Kenji, do you have any that you can mention, or at the very least, kind of talk a little bit about how Mueller will work directly with utilities to address some of these challenges? David mentioned the importance of these pilot projects and vendors and utilities working together. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think many of our customers, including those that Russ is involved in, one of the issues is that there's just not enough capital, resources and budgets to go replace everything that needs to be repaired. So when a kind of a common rule of thumb is maybe 1% of your linear assets you can replace annually. And so at 1%, that's 100 years it's going to take you to replace all those assets, and these assets are becoming aged and needing repair already. So the technology can really help prioritize using condition assessment, using leak detection, and again, monitoring the progression of those leaks. And so using these technologies, it really helps you prioritize where is the best place to spend that 1% to minimize your water loss and be able to maximize, obviously, your revenue and your budget. With respect to a customers, for example, we have in the Northwest. They've recently put in a AMI metering, solutions to be able to do, obviously to get metering information remotely. And during the virus pandemic that we're in, they were one of the few in their region that was able to continue to bill their customers during the pandemic. And so the ability to bill your customers accurately during the pandemic was really, really important to them and should be to anybody. But as well as that, they're using the metering data to be able to see how is the demand and the demand forecasting changing during the pandemic, because people have a different behavior now than they did, when they were going to work every day and people were going to school every day. So that information is going to allow them to, not only hopefully optimize their costs in terms of demand planning, but also customer satisfaction and really optimize their network in many, many different ways.
Sure, and David, coming to you next here. Any other interesting projects that you've seen taking place in the market or that you've been involved in that really kind of highlight some of these points on recapturing revenue and things of that nature?
Yeah, I was just mentally going through which one should I pick, because there are really good examples. Let me go kind of a little different direction. There are zones in water systems where the elevation changes drastically and drops down, and consequently pressures get higher. So there are zones, if you will, that are controlled by what are called pressure reducing valves, which are housed in pits. And for years, we just simply did this as a matter of course. And one of the things that came across in our very first investigation of acoustic monitoring was, why do we have main breaks at 3 o'clock in the morning in these pressure reducing valve zones? What's going on? And we thought about it for a while, and the situation is this: that when water is flowing during a day, the flow of the water itself, the higher the flow, the pressure drops. And simple example, in a garden hose, But essentially what the issue was that at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's not a whole lot of flow going on. Nobody's really using water. So the pressure, not necessarily at the, excuse me, at the PRV, but further down into the system is actually very much higher. So we came across a company that offered to make a flow sensitive pressure reducing valve. In other words, when the flow dropped, the pressure would also drop, and therefore the pressure would be pretty constant. And there have been variations of this, but one of the things that we did learn was that putting a flow monitor and a pressure monitor started telling us information that we didn't even think about. One in which Russ was involved was a location where suddenly we could see changes in the night flow that would tell us where there was a leak worth investigating in that zone. Even before we put the acoustic monitors in, there was a clue that was telling us, yeah, this place has leaks. We can see them in the sense of flow monitors. And as we did this across the country with various pilots, we found places where there were valves open between the pressure zones that was causing not a wasted water, but wasted energy. We found people opening fire hydrants in the middle of the day, all kinds of things that we really didn't imagine, which are really precursors of that monitoring system that I think we're all headed towards.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think we've had some really good thoughts so far. I just want to pause for a minute, remind our audience, if anybody has any questions at all for any of our panelists, feel free to submit them at any time, and I will get to them. So I want to bring up another point that I talked quite a bit about on Tuesday, or at least I brought it up a couple of times. Again, just to kind of connect everything that we're talking about to the subject of financial planning, and a lot of the area that a lot of our audience members are right in their wheelhouse. So if all of these technologies that we're talking about, we're talking about, on the apparent loss side, obviously, in a general sense, we're talking about improvements in metering. On the real loss side, we're talking a lot about acoustic monitoring, continuous monitoring, implementing sensors and data loggers to locate leaks. So I'm wondering, when technologies like this are implemented at utilities, how much of the conversation reaches those finance managers, the people involved in doing some of the future rate planning? Are they involved in these decisions? How involved do they get in some of the conversations behind the scenes in implementing these types of technologies? Keisha, can you offer any insight on any of that?
Sure. I think it's essential for financial personnel, to be involved, to understand the technology, and to be able to see the benefit, or the financial impact of actually implementing, a particular technology or whatnot. I guess in terms of our particular project and realizing, against value-added savings and addressing these meter inaccuracies, we are not actually is quote unquote budgeting, so these funds, I guess, will eventually show up as revenue or in the form of surplus funds, maybe at the end of the year. So I do think it's important that, financial personnel, be involved, because as an operations person, I'm looking at this as an asset management, type of project with associated risk in revenue if we don't address it. And so that's perhaps a different perspective than what a financial person may look at it as. I just think that it's important to have all stakeholders, around the table when we're evaluating this. Our customer service people, they know exactly what customers are calling for, what they're complaining about. So I think it's important that, everyone who's essential and has a voice on these particular projects are sitting around the table to understand its benefits. And then once those benefits are realized, then, the financial person can, begin to budget for, recovered revenues, and customer service understands, the meter readings, et cetera. And then from an operations standpoint, just kind of getting the job done and ensuring that our distribution system and assets are healthy. So I think everyone plays a role in the success of a project like this, but definitely financial folks, I think, need to have a seat at the table.
Sure. Yeah, that's some great perspective. And Russ, you already, kind of touched on this a little bit with, talking about in New Jersey, you guys obviously being an investor-owned utility, you're kind of a little bit at the mercy of your shareholders and regulators involved in the process. But what are your perspectives on this? Kind of more the finance personnel being in the mix on these types of decisions.
Yeah, it's a very complicated question, actually, because on the one hand, you're looking at capital investments, and on the other hand, you're looking at operational expenses. So you have to do a balance of what's going to impact what. So when we're building these business cases to look at solutions and possibly implement solutions, we have to look at both. And the best way that we found to do this is absolutely, number one, bring in the financial side of it, the finance team. And I know I'm going to not be able to say probably half of what I have in my head right now, but I'll try. The way that we found it best is to do a comprehensive planning study. And it's a forward-looking plan, usually 5 years minimum, more likely 10 years. The technologies change rapidly. So, what we have on the market today is a lot different than it was 5 years ago. That being said, the comprehensive planning studies take a look at system needs, and we're talking about above-ground assets, below-ground assets, and we come up with a list of investment opportunities. That brings together the capital finance group because they have to go out and borrow the money to make that available. And also it brings in the operational people. They're very interested to get that capital to see where it could be utilized to make sure that their assets are robust enough and things are getting fixed or maintained or improved. So one of the things that is done is for the budgeting purposes, the business performance group that handles water loss and the project delivery group, which handles water loss management, are actually engaged with the finance team in coming up with the system delivery budgets for all of the systems that we service. So that impacts, of course, the how much operational monies are going to be available for each of the water systems that we serve. So there's quite a bit of discussion about that. Because once you start improving your water losses, and the example I gave before is very significant. When you're telling a production manager, well, your budget is going to be $2.8 million less this year, they're going to throw their hands up in the air and say, what are you doing to me? And you have to have the answer for them. Well, you're going to need to purchase or produce 1.7 billion gallons less of water. You better be pretty sure of that. Otherwise, it could be very damaging for the utility. So like I said, it's a very complicated process. You have to get everybody on board. operations, finance, engineering, and everybody has to have proper input into a comprehensive planning document that will address these things.
Certainly, and Kenji, I think come at this from a slightly different angle, but from Mueller's perspective, when you guys are in talks with some customers on, AMI projects, or for example, how much are the finance personnel in the mix in those discussions? Do they get involved? Can you offer any perspective on that?
Yeah, I can definitely offer perspective of the way we think about our solutions and the way we think about our customers, in that, not unlike a lot of other companies out there, we like to think about the user experience, the customer experience. What are we trying to accomplish with that? And then work backwards from there by providing a service or a solution. And so when we think about the user and customer experience, I'm going to probably say the same thing that both Keisha and Russ have said. The asset manager, the supervisor, the operations supervisor, finance, and engineering. And those are the personas that we want to make sure that our solutions and services address. And so there's no doubt about it that, that we try to make sure that our solutions address finance, particularly, especially when it comes to, the cost savings, right? And so our products have to have a really clear line of sight of what is our cost of our product to adopt and integrate our product. And of course, what's the total life cycle kind of cost and cost savings? And then, of course, is there a business case, and is there a return on that investment? So, and so that analysis and having that champion and having that persona, as part of our customer base in helping to make those decisions is super important to the way we look at our products.
Sure, and Dave, coming to you next. What have you observed in this area? Just kind of synergies between operations and finance, or perhaps lack thereof.
Okay, well, just dropping back real quick to the pilots. A lot of those are sort of considered slam dunks, because oftentimes, and part of the job of a researcher is to find out what people need in the utility. So if you've got somebody, hey, I've got horrendous leakage, they might be very much the candidate to try some device that you feel would be appropriate. And in cases like that, Russ was talking about expense of the water. The first case we had back in 2005, the water was costing $4,000 per million gallons. So that's reducing water loss there was an automatic win. And it was also tied to AMI, which was interesting. It was actually the very first of the AMI linked communication networks that brought in leakage detection information, and it actually helped to justify AMI to use the leakage control. So the two ended up paying off together. But going forward, I can only absolutely agree with everybody. Everybody's got to be engaged here, and the anecdote that I would provide has to do with customer service people who have very definite issues. They're on the front lines dealing with the customers. They try to come up with some methodologies that will streamline their business. But if I'm suddenly introducing AMI that's going to provide 4 readings a day, boy, you better have those people on board helping you out, because their whole life is going to change. They're looking at suddenly an array of data about a customer's water use that they've never ever seen before. So it's really, really important to be aware of the capability of the technology and draw everybody into it, so that everybody, again, is kind of is on board. Or if there are not really agreements, hey, this is going to help or this isn't going to help, then that, again, becomes feedback to provide the vendor that is going to help them in the long run as well.
All right, everyone, great perspective. For my next question, I wanted to get into an area that's kind of been trending recently, and that is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And if for everyone who saw Dave's presentation in our first half-hour block, this is really what he talked a little bit about, and that impact on revenue recovery, cost savings. I know maybe not all of you can speak to this directly, but I'd just be curious for any of your thoughts on. I think this is kind of back to the beginning. I mentioned some of the buzzwords that we hear in the industry. This is certainly a new one. I'm wondering how prevalent it is or widespread this is being adopted by utilities. Of course, technology adoption, it always comes with a cost. So, pretty dependent on which utilities can adopt it. Keisha, do you have any thoughts, or what? Have you had any vendors or approach you as a utility, or conversations about technologies geared toward with machine learning concepts? What do you make of some of this?
Yes, definitely. I have had many vendors contact me about AI and machine learning and increased analytics, especially for the plants and really for the distribution system. One of the things that, I have found out just through talking to vendors and just learning more about the technology, that I think is first important that as a utility, we understand what we want to measure. Kind of knowing that, and figuring out what data is needed to drive decisions. And then, investing in these various sensors or monitors or outputs, on those particular assets to be able to feed into the AI solution or integrate with the AI solution. So, here at the authority, we are not there yet, I think, but we are in a place that we are beginning to really think about it, because we know that is the way the industry is moving towards. We just completed our 2020 strategic master plan. And as we begin to work on these capital improvement projects and make improvements throughout our distribution system and in our plants, that's kind of on the forefront of our mind in terms of figuring out the necessary sensors and data outputs that we would need to, eventually integrate into an AI solution. And we've also been working with some innovation partners that we, talk to or kind of consult with in terms of various, new technologies that are coming on board, and kind of get some third-party input from there. The other thing, that as we begin to move forward, maybe into embracing this AI technology and machine learning, is that, we do realize too the importance of training our operators and supervisors and crews, and just, ensuring that they can interpret the data. Being able to use the data to make the necessary process control decisions, because you just don't want to, advance or invest in something just because it's the latest thing to do. It really has to make sense. And then we have to be able to really utilize that data to make smarter decisions and, drive efficiencies. So we are definitely, at the very beginning stages of that. I'm very fortunate that vendors are willing to share so much information, because I think it's just important to understand and learn so that you can make the best, investment possible for, your particular situation. But there definitely has to be some understanding, on the utilities part as to what they are really trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and it certainly is early stages, so we'll definitely see how it progresses in the coming years. But Russ, what are your thoughts on AI, machine learning, and what are you hearing about some of those concepts? And has New Jersey American Water done any work like that?
Yeah, well, we rely heavily upon good data, and taking that data and utilizing it properly. And let me just expound a little bit upon that with some concrete examples. I mentioned geographic information systems earlier, and hydraulic models have their role. GIS used to, a lot of people would take a look at it and say, we can only use it for this. But now with the interoperability, and I know David mentioned this earlier, where you have different data silos, and now that we're able to bring all this divergent data together and trying to look at things a little bit differently has been a tremendous boon. For example, I had mentioned customers. Just being a big utility, it's easy, believe it or not, to lose customers. You just lose track of them. We get somebody gets turned off because they move out, and then somebody else moves in, and they turn themselves on, and you don't know about it. And it's helpful that we have now systems in place that'll say, oh, that should have been a zero consumption. Now we have an actual read here. Somebody must be living here. Either that or the mice in the basement figured out how to turn on the water in the house, which typically isn't the situation. But I think the biggest impact has really come in asset management on our buried linear assets, utilizing the cohort analysis and bringing in information about corrosive soils, loading on pipelines that wasn't anticipated, aging, through cohort of different ages of pipe. Has been very, very helpful to do planning as far as rehabilitation and replacement. So there's a lot more to come. How many layers of data can you plug into these things? I think the answer is as many as you think are necessary, but the caveat to it is the quality of the data you're plugging in. And, there needs to be a lot of data scrubbing, especially on your own assets before you, turn these models live and start to utilize them for investment purposes.
Sure, absolutely. And Kenji, how does Mueller, how have you guys approached sort of this advent of artificial intelligence, machine learning? I know you guys have been working on, just as in kind of a general description, kind of integrating more of your products into kind of a more singular platform. How does AI fit into some of that?
So we're definitely understand the importance of it, and like David said, it is going to change the way we do everything in the solutions that we have. So at Mueller, we're investing very heavily in our cloud platform, our IoT platform, therefore gathering data into our data lake and doing insights and AI and machine learning. And so it's a very big investment. It's part of our most exciting digitalization type of project. But what's funny, and David, I wasn't in your last talk that you apparently talked about this, so I hope I don't contradict, but I'll make a kind of a blanketed statement that customers don't say, I want machine learning or I want AI, like for what, right? And Keisha was talking about what kind of data do we want? And so again, in that philosophy of really trying to understand the end user and the customer needs, what problem you're solving, and the different personas of problems you're solving, it's really about, can we provide valuable insights that have a return on investment and that have, create value and efficiencies and happiness with customers and the end customers, the residentials and those using the water. And so the real challenge in it is that insight. What is that, the value and return on investment that we're looking for? So yes, we're highly focused on that, and the product development process that we're looking at, and we're leveraging our technologies and reducing leaks, predicting leaks, prioritizing capital spend on those pipes or other assets that are predicted to fail soon, or like Keisha was also talking about the human part, managing remote workers through digital interfaces and having AI and other type of predictive models helping them perform their job better or scheduling their job automatically and better. So there's actually a lot of interesting use cases that we think provide real value through insights, and it just happens to be done through AI in these cases.
Right. And David, so, having heard, everyone's, remarks just kind of on these AI concepts, how do you have any kind of concluding thoughts on this question? And maybe as a part two to that, where do you kind of see some of these concepts going in the near future in the water sector?
I think anywhere you have a lot of data that can be applied to solve a problem, there's a potential for machine learning. And I was thinking when Keisha first started talking about the large meters, boy, that's a sweet target to me. All of a sudden now you're getting 20, every hour on the hour data from a meter. You have information about the meter, the manufacturer. You could look at the water quality. You could look at whether it's inside or outside. There are any number of things that you can take in combination. And if you can somehow start working on some predictions of, hey, it's time to recalibrate this meter, or it's time to even replace a large meter, which is a major undertaking, by the way. That has extreme value to a utility, and I hope Keisha's nodding in agreement there, because it's where the money is, and that's really going to be the key, is to look for those places, and you start and see where can I collect data to address a problem. The water plant's an easy target because you've got all kinds of things that the plant operator's doing. And by the way, you can actually use that machine learning to work simulations. So you can train your new operators on how to use a particular application without destroying the water quality. You can put them through their paces with a training option with the machine learning, because the machine learning can instruct or at least guide you, if not automate, certain processes along the way.
Yeah, well, that's some great perspective from all of you. We do have an audience question that came in, and I think this would be good for Keisha and Russ to start off with. Is there anything that vendors can do to provide data in a better way to facilitate financial approvals internally and with regulators, et cetera? Keisha, any thoughts on that?
Is there any way a vendor?
Yeah, let me read it one more time. Is there anything vendors can do, or I guess do better, to provide data in a better way to facilitate financial approvals internally or with regulators? And I assume we're talking about approval for technology implementation. I guess that's what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would point to David's point of piloting. I think for a utility, it's extremely important before sometimes we make that large dollar investment that it works, and that it's given us the data that we need, and we're able to utilize that data, and it's in a user-friendly way of interpreting it, and then being able to, see, and realize maybe some return on investment if we were to move forward with the project. So I think anytime a vendor is willing to pilot or invite us into a customer who is actually, utilizing it and has had success, and we can actually, have a one-on-one conversation, with another utility who has had success with it. Anytime we can see, those real benefits, then, and then we can visualize how it would apply to our situation and how it would be beneficial to our setup, then, we, as leaders, then, we see the benefit, we see the why, and we can begin to push that through, the proper approval process. So I think if anything, if vendors are willing to, do pilots and allow us to speak to successful customers and learn how they were able to apply the technology, I think that's always good, for us to see.
Yeah, and Russ, maybe I'll just come to you really quickly for some thoughts on that. Anything you think maybe vendors could do differently or better to help facilitate this implementation?
Yes, there is. First of all, the vendors need to know their product and make sure that whatever they're submitting out there, they can back up. Number two, they not only need to know their product, they need to know competitive products. And in my opinion, I think they need to know the competitive products even better than their own, because that just leads to a better product line from all the vendors. And the different vendors I've worked with, I'm going to use Kenji as an example here. Having utilized Mueller technologies, extensively, we're constantly going back and saying, well, can you do this? Oh, you used to have this. To the point where the user experience has changed so dramatically in the past few years because of the input of the customers. So I think that's part of it. And the other part of it, and it goes back to the piloting, is having the manufacturer understand the business case. And to the point of where they not only understand the business case, but they work with the purchaser to help build the business case. So I think that's something that all of the manufacturers should think about up front, is working with the different water system purveyors to help them build that business case. And if financially it doesn't come to fruition, they have to have some skin in the game to prove out their points. Because I've seen many times in the past decade where, oh, you put this device in and you're going to save $10 million. And there's, you're just throwing darts at a dartboard, and that's not helpful to anybody. It's not helpful to the industry, especially.
Yeah. Well, Kenji, I don't think they beat up on you too bad. You have any thoughts on that?
I probably couldn't add too much compared to the being that they're the customer voice, but yeah, I would again just reiterate that we need to know what value our data does, and if we can show that value of the data and the return on investment of that information and insight, then I think that it will get approved rather quickly through a finance group, and that's kind of the way we think about it.
Yeah, David, any concluding thoughts on this one on your end, just kind of the I guess vendor customer relationship?
Yeah, I immediately wrote down "tell the truth," and listen. And actually, that's a two-way street. And I'll give you a really good example. We were evaluating an AMR drive-by system. It passed all. We took a special trip to North Carolina to check it out, and it all worked well. And we go and put it out in the field, and some people from some state, I think it was New Jersey, had an issue with the process. And we said, didn't they collect all the information? And they said, yeah, well, they had to drive up and down every street. We're going, yeah, is that a problem? He said, well, the system we used to use, we didn't have to go down every street. We could just pick it up because the radio reception pickup was better. Something that the vendor had no way to know. And frankly, as the piloting guy, was unaware that the guys were actually doing some shortcuts. And so, yeah, it's a two-way street. Listen, pay attention, and all the things that everybody else has already volunteered.
All right, guys. Well, I want to go through one more question, and as I mentioned on Tuesday during our first session, that this was probably something that we could maybe apply to every one of these questions, but we don't want to make it too much of an influence on the conference. But I can't help but bringing up current events as far as this COVID-19 pandemic. It has affected utility operations a little bit. I guess on the finance side, there's been revenue loss, although there were some comments made last week that it probably could have been worse than what it's going to be. I'm wondering, everything that we're talking about right now with different technologies and how the impact on utilities, considering an emergency situation like a pandemic, and now that we sort of have experienced this, what role do you think some of these technologies might play in helping utilities to become more resilient to these types of situations, whether it's right now or down the road? Keisha, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think these technologies will play a tremendous role in emergency situations and operations resiliency. Going through a pandemic, we have learned a lot, and at the same time, we're also going through our compliance with the America's Water Infrastructure Act in terms of having to certify through our risk and resiliency assessment and our emergency response plans. And so I think with all of this, in mind is, having us to think a little bit differently, to think about how can I maintain my operations if I don't have people to actually report to work? How can I continue to bill, our customers, and receive revenue, during these times? And, what if we can't, get to the facility, what do we do? So, in trying to, answer these questions, I think, technology will provide solutions. I just think that, technology is going to drive us, future forward in being able to be more resilient. When we talk about automation, looking at more automation and remote control, and just being able to handle business remotely and still have customer interaction and interaction with our employees. So I think it's tremendous. And like I said, we're kind of going through, asking ourselves that question now, evaluating various platforms, because, even after the pandemic, I think some of the things that we have implemented will stay. Much of our workforce, never truly work from home, so to speak, so just even looking at something, it's not small, but, really looking at truly adopting like teleworking policies, just different things I think have arose out of this pandemic. So I think technology is key, to being resilient, making sure we have backup systems in place, making sure, our financial models capture these times. In terms of our planning, to make sure that we have those, backup, emergency funds, available to continue the operation. So I think we're just going to begin to look at how we operate, through a different lens, and technology is at the heart of that.
Sure. Russ, your thoughts on this?
Yes. Very interesting comment I want to add here. One of our tabletop exercises for emergency response was, guess what? Pandemic. And here we are. And I remember so clearly people saying, we're never going to use this. This is not going to happen. And here we are. So I'm so glad that, the leadership saw that was a possibility. And it was kind of a joke at the time when we went through the tabletop exercise, but here we are, and we're still meeting our goals of getting 99.8% of actual meter reads. Everybody's, the customers have uninterrupted, service. We've had to delay some maintenance, depending upon where the maintenance needs to be done, if it's on private facilities. But the other thing that really helped out is modernizing our workforce and making sure that they were enabled to get information as Keisha said, we're having reporting from home. As you can see, I'm talking to you from my dining room right now. But that goes for the meter readers too, and the guys that are fixing the main breaks. Everybody's doing the same thing. And, we have a number of apps that were built internally to get information out to the people in the field. So we were not, challenged to pass around papers and, do work orders that way. Everything was electronic to begin with. So we had positioned ourselves for the unthinkable, I guess. So technology in that way really did assist us with this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, you kind of forget that emergency planning for utilities is actually a big deal. And, I've mentioned on a couple times, just talking to other people about this, that I think the AWWA State of the Industry report, I think in 2019, emergency planning was like number 9, I think, on the top challenges, top issues. And so, there's a couple ways to look at that. It's not that it wasn't prioritized by the industry necessarily, but just kind of illustrates how many regular challenges that there are in addition to that. So Kenji, what are your thoughts on kind of technology resilience now and in the future as it relates to a pandemic and emergency planning?
Well, I think the technology, like mentioned before, being able to do remote type of activities, remote metering, and being able to identify or pinpoint leaks or where the field crews need to go without searching around. So minimizing their time, being out and about and together when they don't need to be together in this type of situation, those are very helpful and promote more safety in their work. And when you get to that, getting that digital information is one thing, but then being able to automatically close that loop of that information to do things automated, like for instance, having our pressure sensors trying to regulate the pressure like we talked about before, and then having our pressure reduction valves like we talked about before, but connecting it to our IoT system, into our software system, and being able to do completely closed loop control of your networks based on pressure drops or pressure needs or whatnot. That automation, again, reduces the need for field workers and people turning valves and those type of more risky activities during a pandemic. And one actually interesting thing, we talked about, the increase of water demand in the pandemic in homes. The other kind of flip side of that is the decrease of water demand in places like workplaces. So, we have water quality stations, we have automatic flushing stations. So, the need to flush out stagnant or, water that's been just stagnant or at too low of a pressure for too long. Those are other use cases to deal with the public safety and the cleanliness of the water. So there's a lot of exciting things that technology can do to hopefully make life easier in those hard times.
Definitely. David, thoughts on tech resilience?
Yeah, not much to add here, although I can't help but think, what would we have done if this had happened 20 years ago? We would have been a mess. And there'd be a lot more deaths amongst water utility people, I would suspect, just because of the necessary interfacing that would have had to have taken place. So for that, I guess I'm grateful that the technology has moved forward sufficiently. And my only other comment just has to do with quality of life. The skies out here in the Denver area seem a little bluer. The traffic is a whole lot less, and that's a pleasant thing in ways. But at the same time, I haven't gone more than 5 miles away from my house in 6 months. So there's got to be a balance there. Obviously, there are people who are out of work, and there has to be adjustments made, not just for tenant relief, but utility relief, any number of issues that we just, as a citizenry, have to get through it, and I think we will.
Yeah, and that's definitely a good positive spin to put on it, is that perhaps now the technology has advanced to where it has helped us, as opposed to if this would have happened 20 years ago, as you mentioned. But guys, I think that's a good place to leave it. Keisha, Russ, Kenji, David, it's been a pleasure talking with you guys this afternoon. So, guys, thanks for joining us. I'd like to go ahead and conclude for today. We will be back for session 3 next Tuesday, September 15th, same time, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. We'll have the same exact format, half-hour kickoff presentation, and we'll follow it up with a panel discussion. Next Tuesday, the 15th, as I mentioned, we're going to get into some EPA priorities. We're going to talk about how utilities are really addressing new costs associated with regulatory changes. So that'll be a slightly different topic area. So with that said, we'll go ahead and thanks again for joining us, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.